Anthony from mycodeteacher.com, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to list data in a UI table view. So I've got Xcode open here, and as usual let's create a new project. So navigate to File, New Project, and our application is going to be pretty simple. It's really just going to have a instance of UI window with an instance of UI table view on top or inside of it. So we're just going to choose window-based application, and we'll name it simply table view. So once we save that, our project folder is listed on the desktop. The project window comes up. So we've got our usual list of files here. The ones we're going to focus on in this lesson are main.window.zib and the table view app.delegate and or app.delegate.h and .m files. So first, let's actually open main.window.zib and create a table view in which we're going to list some data. Alright, so in our main.window.zib instances window or document window, we have our four default instances. Files owner, which again is UI application or the application as a whole. First responder, which isn't actually an instance. Table view app delegate, which is what we're going to be doing most of our coding in, or actually all of our coding in. And the default window. So of course, as told by the default code, this window is brought to or displayed on screen when the application first launches by default. So as you might expect, this is where we're going to add our table view. So first, we're going to drag a table view from the library window onto the UI window instance. If you don't have the library window open, you can open it by navigating to Tools, Library, or Shift-Command-L. So we've got our basic UI elements here, and you do some scrolling, you can find the UI table view. So simply drag and drop. You can see that Interface Builder nicely resizes it so that it fits perfectly in the window. And so if you go to the Inspector panel, the Attributes Inspector panel, which of course you can bring up by navigating to Tools, Attributes Inspector, we have here list of attributes or styling elements that you can change for your table view. So for example, the style of the table view, whether it be plain or grouped, we're going to use plain because this is really going to be a basic table view, and plain is perfect for what we want to do here. I'm not going to go over any of the other attributes. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. So let's actually get into how populating or listing data in a table view actually works. So the first time you attempt to do this, you may be kind of confused because the way that listing data in a table view is done may seem a little bit unorthodox or a little strange, but once you fully understand it, it actually makes a lot of sense. And you can see that using the method that Apple has provided allows you to very easily customize your table views and list any kind of data in any way you'd like. In this lesson, we're just going to list some basic text in each row, but in another lesson, you can see how to fully customize each row in how it appears on the screen or in the table view. So first, what we need to do here is we need to look at the documentation so we can see how this is actually done. So as it turns out, each table view has something called a data source object. A data source object is an object that it sends messages to or calls to retrieve data that it should display. There are very specifically outlined methods that a table view will call or send to its data source object, and it expects very specific return values so it knows exactly how to draw itself out. So that may seem a little confusing, so let's actually go to the documentation and look at these methods. So let's type in UI table view data source, and up comes the UI table view data source protocol reference. So a protocol in this case is simply a list of methods that another object can implement if in a certain situation, so that some action or group of actions can be executed correctly. So you can see here that there's a number of UI table view data source protocol methods, and so basically when a table view when an application launches, in this case when a table view is first trying to draw itself on screen or display itself, it's going to call to the methods here that do not have optional next to them first, and then it'll call to the optional methods, or it'll check to see if its data source object actually implements the optional methods, and if it does, it'll call to them and use what is given in return. So basically, the data source object can be any object you'd like, but once you tell a table view that a particular object is its data source object, then it's your job as the developer to implement these specific methods in that data source object, and write out the code and return what you'd like to be returned, so as to tell the table view what you want it to display. So let's actually set it up in code. So you may be a little confused right now, but once we actually get into the coding and you see it work, it won't be as confusing. So first, let's actually make the connection here so that this table view has a data source object. Data source is just an instance variable, or a non-private instance variable, public instance variable, and so what you do is you can set the data source object to any object you'd like, and in this case it's going to be the table view app delegate. So you can see when we make the connection, when we right click and drag from the table view to the table view app delegate object, two outlets pop up, data source and delegate. Delegate is another protocol, but we're not going to get into that in this lesson. We're just going to go over data source. So if you click and connect the data source outlet, this table view is now, when the application launches, is going to call to this table view app delegate object, this particular instance of table view app delegate, and based on what's returned in these method calls, it's going to draw data in itself. So let's actually get into the coding, because that's when you'll be able to most easily see exactly how this works. So if you go back to the Xcode project window and open the TableViewAppDelegate.m file, we can start filling out these methods. So the first one is a method called number of sections in table view. So first let's just type that out. The return type is NSInteger, and then the header, number of sections in table view, followed by another parameter, or actually followed by a first parameter, table view. Okay, so it reads finally as number of sections in table view, and this, based on what is returned here, a table view will display that many sections or try to draw that many sections. So if we go back to Interface Builder for a second, you can see here that each section in a table view begins with a header, in this case California. So you can have as many of these sections, basically just a way of organizing data in a table view, as you'd like. We're only going to deal with one section here, so we're simply going to return 1. So when the application launches, the table view will send a message, or the message number of sections in table view, and pass itself as the parameter here, and based on what's returned, it'll draw that many sections. So since we're returning a constant 1, it'll always have one section. If you were to have multiple table views calling to the same data source object, you could use some if statements say for example, if table view equals, table view 1, then return 1 section. Else, if table view equals table view 2, return 2 sections, whatever you'd like. But we're only going to have this one table view calling to this data source object or to our table view app delegate object. So that's not going to be an issue here. So as of right now, this table view will have 1 section. The next method we're going to want to implement, and of course all the methods that you saw in the documentation are not all mandatory. Only a few are mandatory. The 3 that we're doing here. And if you don't implement the mandatory data source methods, the application will crash because the table view is going to send or call to its data source object, and when it sees that the data source object doesn't actually implement these methods, it's going to throw an exception and crash the application. Okay, so the next method here also returns NSInteger. It is table view UI table view number of rows in section. Integer, NSInteger, section. Okay, so this next method, in the case that your table view does have multiple sections, you can tell the table view how many rows each section is going to have. So this is basically a way the table view can anticipate how many rows it needs to draw. So we're just going to return a constant 5. So as of right now, our table view has 1 section, and in that 1 section are 5 rows. This last data source method here is definitely the most important and the one where most of the work is being done for the developer as to how they'd like the table view to appear. So this method returns a UI table view cell. So before I continue, I'm going to explain what a table view cell is. Each row in a table view corresponds with a table view cell or a UI table view cell. And each cell has some properties that a table view, when drawing that row, looks to know what to display in that row. So basically, it's 1 cell per row. A table view cell is, in a way, just a small view which contains some data or draws some image, some text, anything you'd like. So a table view cell is it actually descends from UI view, but it has some particular or more specific properties that help developers when making table views. So for instance, a table view cell has a text property, and so instead of going through all the trouble of creating some text and then making it, drawing it out in the view exactly at the correct coordinates, you can use a shorthand and just set the text, and the table view will do most of the work for you and center the text, make it a certain color, certain font, truncate it at the end if it's too long to fit in its view. So you'll see that here. So the method is UI or table view, and then a first parameter UI table view. Again, this is going to be the table view that's calling the method. Then cell for row at index path, NSIndexPath, index path. So the second parameter here, the index path, is an index path of the row that the table view is currently trying to draw, or that it's asking for in form of table view cell. So if we go back to Interface Builder, we'll look at this visually. The table view will go 1 row at a time. It'll attempt to draw this first row, Cupertino, then the second row, third, fourth, etc. And each time it draws a row, it'll call to this method, and it'll pass in as the index path the exact location of that row. So here, since this is section 0, row 0, it'll pass an index path, and the index path will contain section 0, row 0. And so as a developer, you know how you want this table view to look, so you'll pass a table view cell, or you'll return a table view cell with the text Cupertino. And it'll follow that process all the way down until it stops drawing, and of course it knows how many rows and how many sections based on what's returned in these first two methods. So let's actually implement this method. So first, I'll explain exactly what this part here is in a second, but we'll just fill this out. Static NSString cell identifier equals cell. Next, UI table view cell. So this is going to be the cell that is returned at the end of this method. This is the cell that we're going to give to the table view for each independent row to use to draw that row. So you can think of a cell as basically an object that contains information that the table view uses to draw out the data inside that cell. So again, each cell is a small little view, and in that view is our subviews, which you can use to display your data. So for example, the most basic cell is a view with a label in the middle, and by changing the text in that label, you can display any data that you want. So UI table view cell equals table view DQ reusable cell with identifier cell identifier. So here is where the cell identifier comes into play, as you can see by the fact that the method name has cell with identifier in it, and we're passing cell identifier as the parameter. As you can imagine, table views can very quickly use up memory, in that each row needs its own table view cell for drawing. So if you had a table view with 1,000 rows, which right now may seem like a bit much and you can't really find any situations where you might need that many, it actually does come up quite a bit because the iPhone is very powerful and you can display lots of data. For table views with lots of data, again, each row needs its own table view cell. So one table view cell doesn't take up a lot of memory, but many table view cells very quickly consume a lot of memory. A table view cell is a sort of a large object. It contains a lot of information that the table view uses to know exactly how to draw each row. So to conserve memory for table views that consist large amounts of data, or for really any table view at all, Apple has come up with a very clever way of conserving, or of doing this, of conserving memory when dealing with table views. What they've done is they've created an environment in which cells that have the same layout or the same basic properties, the same subviews, whatever, are grouped by a single identifier that is consistent throughout those cells. So if you had 100 cells that all had just some text in the middle, some black large text in the middle, and each cell just had some different data in that text field or just displayed different text, you can group those all by one cell identifier. So what happens here is, for cells that have this same layout, at the beginning of this method here, you call to a method called DQ reusable cell with identifier. You send that message to the table view that's currently trying to draw itself. As you can see here, the table view calls to this method and sends itself as the first parameter here, so you can reference it. And by sending this message to the table view, you can check to see if the table view has already drawn a cell of this particular kind, or a cell with the identifier cell here. And in the case that it does have a cell that has that identifier, or it already has drawn a cell with that layout, it will return that, and you can reuse that cell. So you get back that old cell that was previously used to draw some data, and you can simply modify the cell's data and then pass it back, and the table view will redraw it. So basically, as the table view goes down its rows, all these cells that have the same basic layout are really just one instance of UI table view cell with slightly modified data. So we'll see that in action in a minute if you don't get it just yet. So the first row, the first time the table view calls this method, it of course hasn't actually used a cell yet. This is the first time it's drawing a row. So after calling this, we need to use an if statement here to see if this method here passes back nil, meaning that it has not yet used a table view cell instance with this identifier. So in that case, we need to actually create an instance of this particular cell. So UI table view cell alloc, again for allocate, init with style. Now this is a table view cell method, particular to UI table view cell, init with style, UI table view cell style default. Now there are a few styles that you can use that have basic layouts that Apple has seen developers use over and over again. So the most basic is just a cell with some large black text in the middle. So a view with a UI label in the middle. Another one that is very often used is a cell with an image on the left and some text on the right. So these basic or common cell layouts you can create using these constants. So passing in a different constant for the first parameter here, init with style. Now this is the default style with simply some text in the middle. And reuse identifier. Identifier. Cell identifier. Auto release. So now we've actually created a table view cell. This is the one we're going to be reusing. So let's actually just break this up so it's easier to read. You can see here we've auto-released the cell so that when it's done being used, it's automatically released from memory, because of course we can't release it at the end of this method because the application will crash because the table view needs to use this cell. So now this default style equips a this UI table view cell with this center label, this black text label, and it's stored in the property text label. So we can modify the text like so. Text label text equals, and then input some text. So again, because we've created a cell with this style, this table view cell that we just created sees this, and it creates a UI label and places it in the middle of the cell, makes it relatively large and black colored, and it stores a reference to this label in its text label property, so we can get access to that label by referencing the text label property. So we can get access by calling to text label and then set the text with the label's text property. So this is basically a relay of property calls. So now if we return the cell and launch the application, we should have a table view with 5 rows, 1 section, and each row, or every row, should have the text, some text. Because you can see here that we haven't actually done anything to differentiate the rows. So you can see 5 rows all have the same text. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually change the text for each row. So you can see here that when the table view calls to this method, the second parameter it passes is an instance of NSIndexPath. NSIndexPath, specialized for table views for the iPhone OS, have two properties, a row property and a section property. The row property contains the row currently trying to be drawn, and the section property contains the section that said row is in. So we don't need to actually use this section because we know we only have one section, so we just need to work with the row property. So index path.row equals 0. The indexes here start at 0, just like arrays. Cell text label text equals some text. Else, if index path.row equals 1, cell text label text equals some text 2. We're just going to make this really simple so you can see that each row will have different text. Index path.row equals 2, cell text label text equals some text 3. Else if index path.row equals 3, cell text label text equals some text 4. Now you can see this is somewhat repetitive, but we'll see a different way to do this using an array in a minute, or a few minutes. For cell text label text equals some text 5. So now if we launch our application, each row, typo. Okay, now if we launch the application, each row has different text. So when you're dealing with large amounts of data, you can imagine that you're not going to want to have to call to 1,000 else if statements. So instead of using a bunch of else ifs, we can call to an array. So let's go back to our application did finish launching method, or actually let's go back to our table view app.delegate.h file, and let's create an array, an instance variable that is an array, nsArray table view data array. And now let's actually add some data to this array. Table view data array equals nsArray array with objects. So nsArrays, if you have not yet seen them, are very powerful but also very simple and easy to use. So the array with objects class method allows you to fill in different objects in this array. We're just going to create an array with a bunch of strings because we want to give these strings to the text labels text property, and this will return an array containing these objects. So array with objects, some text 2. You can see each element or each object in the array is separated by comma. Some text 3, some text 4, and some text 5. And you can see already this is much simpler and much quicker. And creating arrays with multiple objects must end with nil so that the nsArray knows where to stop. And we're going to want to add retain to the end. So after creating this array, we need to send a retain message so that it doesn't automatically release itself. NSArray instances created with the array with objects method, this one here, automatically release themselves at the end of their scope. So they're added to the NS auto release pool, and basically at the end of this method, the application sees that there's no more use for it and automatically releases it. So we need to add a retain to increase the retain count. And now, much more simply, we can do this. Cell text label dot text equals table view data array object at index path dot row. So now you can see NSArrays have a method called object at index, and simply by passing in the index you want to grab the element at, the array will return the object at that index. So as the table view goes down the rows to draw each row, this row here will change and we'll constantly be getting a different value from the array. So now if we build this, we get the same effect. So you can see here that table views, once you get the hang of them, are relatively simple to manage and to list data in, but are very, very powerful and very, very, very common in iPhone applications. Well, I'm Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. This wraps up the table view data lesson. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope you continue to tune in for future lessons.